In this video, we're going to be taking a look at tool presets inside of Photoshop and also taking a look at this blank document that I'm providing for you. So if you come up here to the upper left, you can see we've got a bunch of different tool presets that I've made. Some of them I've actually made these brushes, some of them maybe I've taken from the Photoshop programs, some of them maybe have even been developed by someone else, and over time just kind of collected these different brushes. What I wanted to show you is that the tool presets work not only for brushes, but I'm using something like the smudge tool, and you can see the smudge tool. I've made some tool presets for that as well. The eraser's got different types of erasers in there. So that's what I kind of like about the tool presets. You don't get to see the brush menu, and you don't get to see the visual part of this, but I kind of like knowing the different brushes that I've got and being able to pick them from a list. The other thing that I've kind of done is added these asterisks to things, so certain brushes that I use a bit more than other brushes are going to show up at the very beginning. So in order to get these different brushes, I'm going to take you over to this Gumroad page that I've got. And so if you go to Gumroad and you just search for NickZ, you can find that I've got this NickZ Photoshop tool presets. So I'm providing you with the tool presets, but then I'm also going to be giving you the blank document that I've got. And it's a smaller version than the one that I actually use, but what it's saying is that we can only upload a 25 megabit size limit. So that's why this document's just a little bit smaller than the document that I would normally use. So I'm going to go ahead and close this down, come back on over to Photoshop, and basically when you open up Photoshop for the first time, if you haven't used tool presets before, you're probably going to see just a few. If we tap B and go to our brush menu, you're probably going to see a few brushes listed over in here. I think there's going to be like a 2B pencil or something, and I kind of like that and I wanted to keep that. Now what you can do is if you come over here, you can click the gearbox icon after you download the tool presets that I have given you. Just go ahead and say load tool presets like this. If you do load, like I've got these loaded already, it'll load them again, so it's going to kind of double load them. I don't want to do that. If you want things to replace exactly what's there, go ahead and say replace tool presets. So we can go ahead and click that. I'm going to go ahead and navigate to where I've saved this off. I'm just going to go ahead and load that up. Now, when you load these, they've given the option with this new version of Photoshop to import them as brushes. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to load as tools, so go ahead and do that. And you should see that it's going to kind of replace things. The first one I wanted to show you is this 2B pencil, and the regular one actually it changes the color information, so you can see it's kind of got this gray thing. On the file that I'm giving you, you can see I've made a layer called Sketch, and let's just go ahead and draw directly on there. I'm going to hide the text that's on there. So with this one, it's got a nice kind of, if you have your Wacom pen straight up and down, you can do these nice kind of thinner strokes like this. But if you turn your pen a bit down and kind of tilt it, you can kind of do these kind of fatter strokes all within the same brush. So that's a pretty cool thing to be able to do. Now what I like to do is I like to kind of sketch things out with maybe something like this, and then from there I set up a hotkey for the smudge tool. I use that quite a bit. So if you go to edit and go to keyboard shortcuts and you go to tools, and we kind of scroll down and we need to find the smudge tool, you can see I put that to Z. That's just what I put that at. It works for me. It takes over your zoom button, but what I can show you for that, I'm going to hit OK for this, is if you were to tap Z and normally have your zoom, if we do spacebar and control, you can zoom in and out with that, and or you can hold the spacebar and control and you can plus, and if you, let's see, if you add the spacebar and alt, that's going to zoom out, and then you can do control for in. So I think there's plenty of ways to still zoom in and out without having to use this tool right there. So I'd rather use that for this this smudging tool, just because I bounce back and forth between the brush tool and the smoothing tool. I've got some tool presets for this here. I use this cotton ball rub. That's the one. I don't really use the other ones too much, but you can see with this brush and the smoothing, I can do quite a bit on here. And what I've set up for this blank document for you to kind of work with is this setup where it's kind of this toned paper. So if you've ever gone to the art store and gotten one of these kind of sketchbooks that's toned paper, this is a tan version. What I've done is I've got basically kind of a scan of paper, and it's grayscale, and that blending mode is set to overlay. So if you had a 50% gray layer on here and you set it to overlay, there wouldn't really be any change if you turn that layer on and off. But if you add some darkening effect to it or lighten by pushing up or down on your value scale, that'll show up. So that's all done through this kind of paper texture. It just sits over the top of everything. This looks very kind of CG, but then whenever you put this on top of it, it has a little bit more of a hand-drawn kind of feel to it. Also has some text within here, so if you wanted to label some of your designs, there's already some text that's already created for that. Now the font type for that, if we go to the font type and take a look at that, I like this font quite a bit. You'd have to go and download it if it's not on your machine. You could probably find it with the free fonts somewhere and go ahead and use that. Now I've got a folder in here called Designs, and I've got a layer that's just called Sketch, and I'll use that at the very beginning, and just, you know, you can go ahead and sketch your designs in that particular area. And with this toned paper, what I'm going to show you is this is actually a solid color, and I use these quite a bit, and I like them quite a bit. Concept artists at EA, whenever I used to work there, kind of showed me these solid colors and what their power is. The cool thing about these solid colors is you can always go back and double click on these, and you can, like, I can desaturate this thing, I could make it darker, I could make it pretty much any color that I wanted to. I'm going to add a little more saturation here, and I can step in through here. So you could make this tone paper any kind of color that you're kind of looking for. I'm going to go ahead and cancel. I think this works pretty good for this. So from what I've seen in the stores, you've got this tan kind of paper, and then you might have like the gray version. So somewhere in there is going to give you something that I think you're going to find in a lot of different sketchbooks and things like that. I also have this stripe on here. So if you know anything about Photoshop, this is a layer group, and so you can put things in a group, and then you can put a mask on that group. And so basically I've got a solid color on here so that I can change colors just like what I showed you, and then I've got a bar that I made. If I hold down Alt and click on this mask, you can see what I've made here. I'll hit Alt and click on that again just to go out, and I threw this in a layer group, and it's filled with black, so that means you can't see it because it's being masked out by everything, right? Now I could put this on the brush tool, and I could put it on white like this, and then I could start painting in this particular area, and you can see I can start revealing that bar. So this shape that I'm painting right now is here, and this is just revealing what's under here. If I go ahead and hit Alt backspace, which fills with the foreground color, this one, you can see the whole stripe comes in here. Now if I tap X to go to my black color that I've got here, I could paint black into the mask, right? So then I could make it look like this shape is sitting on in front of that particular stripe. And I'm just doing this for some extra kind of like design element or something. So you don't have to use this. It's just something that is there and is available for you if you wanted to kind of try this out. And as I do, you know, some of these brushes and show you these things off, I'll kind of treat it as if it's a little painting demo. So what I like about these masks is I can tap X and I can go, oops, I went past this line here. No big deal. I can tap X and I can paint into the mask, and I can refine that, and I can make that look a bit better, right? Just something like that. And I'll finish this off here and then here. Okay, so I kind of like that. I'll go back to this sketch thing. I'll tap Z. That's my smudge tool. And again, you might see probably this blur tool, sharpen, and smudge all sit together. So I'm just going to kind of refine this just a little bit more, and through here, like that. And so I'm just making a shape. Now, with this tone paper, I'm going to tap E, put it on my eraser, and then maybe we'll do a softer airbrush erase and make my brush size a little bit smaller. So I'm hitting bracket key left or right. That's one way of doing your brushes larger and smaller. You can hold down Alt and right click and drag, and you can make your brush size interactively larger or smaller. I kind of like using that method myself. And so I'm just going to erase away some of this and clean this up. Okay, like that. So you're seeing how I'm using the brush and the smoothing tool along with the eraser to kind of get something to look a little more clean. If you want, you can go back to your brush. We can go in here. I do like this. First I'm going to maybe use the airbrush soft round and then make the color or this value more towards white, and then paint where I think light might fall on here a little bit more strong on this shape. So with this, I don't have to be super exact because I know I'm going to tap Z and get my smudge tool and kind of do some blending on this. So to me, it feels like this method of working is almost like taking paint and laying a little bit of paint down. And if your paint is still kind of wet, you can kind of push and pull the paint around on the surface, and you can kind of build some really nice soft kind of tones that way. The other thing we've got is, I'm going to show you this brush, and then this is an airbrush glow. So this one is set to color dodge, and that takes whatever this value is and it kind of really tries to crank it up. I'm going to try to put just a little bit of color with this and make my brush size a little bit larger and go over the center of this, kind of like that. And then you can start to do effects that are like glow, or even maybe this starts to feel a little bit more metallic at that point. I'm just going to hit Control Alt Z because I think that was a bit too much for what I'm liking. Control Alt Z is basically your undo commands, and it'll step backwards through that. So again, you can tap Z, and with that hotkey that I made, I'm going to just blend this a little bit more, kind of like this and through here. And if you wanted to give this a color, if you're painting in black and white like this, what I could do is I could hold down all Control and click on here, and I could make maybe even a new solid color layer, just because I like those, to use those for choosing some different kind of color and stuff. So let's say I wanted to make this a goldish color, so we're going to do something kind of like that in there. I'm going to throw this down in underneath the sketch, and then I'm going to change this to multiply. If I change it to multiply, it'll take whatever the value is and kind of push it down. I'm not sure if that'll be the right thing. Let's try overlay, because overlay will darken something and lighten it, so we can try that. If I hold down Alt and then click on here, you can see what I've got. If I hold down Control and click on it, it makes a selection out of it, and then I can hit Alt backspace and fill with this foreground color, which is basically just going here and say Edit, Fill, and doing the foreground color there. So it's just a quicker way of doing that, and I'm hitting it quite a few times to kind of make this more of a solid kind of shape. I can hold down Alt, click on here, and you can kind of go out of this area. Now we can tap E, and we're back into the eraser tool, and I could kind of clean this up a little bit. Now what I'm trying to do is establish that on top of this color is kind of all the shading and everything else like that, right? Now down below, we've got a color that becomes a bit more interactive for us. So if our art director came over and said, hey, let's not make this orangish kind of color, let's push it towards maybe a green or bluish kind of emerald or something, you could kind of easily change some of that, right? Now beyond that, if you make another layer, and we call this, maybe call it like effects or something like that, if you change this to color dodge, and then you take the brush that I was showing you with the airbrush glow, that's set to color dodge. And then if we come through here, I'm going to choose, I don't know, I'm going to try purplish kind of color, something like that. Now if we come through here for something like that, you can see that this builds up to white really quickly. So it's going to get a little bit of that color, but it's also going to become very intense very quickly. So maybe we've got something like that, and if I'm kind of careful like this, I can get a little bit of this purple kind of color in through there. But then maybe if I want this to look like neon, I keep painting on that area, but then maybe I take my brush size and reduce it down a little bit, and then that becomes, the inner part becomes like this hot kind of core for that. So it takes maybe a little bit of time to build up. If you want it to feel like it's kind of really glowing, you can paint outside of it like this. I might take my eraser tool and you could do things like this into it or something like that, right? So there's interesting possibilities for you for what you could do. I'm gonna make this a little bit larger, so I'm just putting on an E. I've got basically an airbrush eraser, and if I make it really large, then I can do some really soft kind of, knocking this stuff back. But if I make the brush size a bit smaller, hold on Alt and right click, then at that point I can get in there and really have an effect on some of these things. So if I wanted to do some kind of pattern or something like that, I have the ability to kind of paint those kind of things, right? I'll put it back on brush, and then maybe we want to make it feel like a little bit of light is hitting down and through here down below. Like this. Maybe we got something like that. Maybe it's somewhat of a reflection. So we've got all this sitting here. The other thing we can do is if we made another layer and call this like line work, and I'll go ahead and put it on a darker brush that you see here. I'll put it on this brush. I do have some comic book kind of inkish, kind of thick to thin brushes, kind of like that. Usually I have kind of an underdrawing for some of that stuff. Now you saw that this effect stuff is going to have an effect on the color of that line work that we see here. So I'm just not being like super straight with the lines. What you could do is, if you want to do that, you can do smoothing. I kind of like this pulled string mode, and if you start on something like that, you can kind of pull this thing along like that, and you can build some pretty darn clean lines using that. So that's the difference between using maybe just kind of freehanding something versus using some of Photoshop's tools that they have to kind of build some of that stuff, something like that, right? Something else that's kind of neat to do is, if we've got this solid kind of color like we've got here, we can right click on here and say blending options. We could put a drop shadow on this thing if we wanted. You can change the color of it, so maybe we don't like pure black and you want this to have a little bit of purple to it, and you want to give it a kind of a direction down and through here. Maybe the distance is a bit higher through there. And you take the opacity and kind of knock it back. The size is also kind of like how soft that thing is. And so let's go ahead and push this back like that. We'll hit OK. Something else that I like to do, we could probably do it on this one. Let's go ahead and give it a look. We could either hand paint this on a layer that's underneath, or we can right click and say blending options. We can also put a stroke on the outside of this and maybe make it white. Crank up the opacity and then maybe change the size of it. Now what I don't like about this is tied to the shape of that thing that we painted from before, and so I'm not a fan of that. So what we could do is just push this down and through here, and I'll call this outline, and then I'll tap B for brush, and then I'll use this white highlighter thin through here like this, and then increase maybe the brush size, and let's turn the smoothing off like this. And I have a hotkey. I tap P for this for the color picker, but you can come through here and then pick that as well. And so I'm just going to come through here kind of like this, and then sketch along there for this kind of white line that you see here. So I'm not going to do the backside. We'll just go ahead and leave that. So you can see that's going to give you some of the different elements on there. Some other brushes that we might want to take a look at is obviously I use the airbrush soft round quite a bit, and you can illustrate with that if you just wanted to use just that brush alone, you could do quite a bit of work with just that brush alone. Like you could kind of be a little bit looser and a little bit sketchier with things with this, kind of like that. And then if you want to tighten up, then you just kind of make your brush size a little bit smaller, and you keep working, and you can be a bit more refined like that. Now this really all matters for what the kind of look that you're going for is, right? So if you don't mind this kind of airbrush-ish kind of look, that's fine. I also do like the pencil brush that we were kind of looking at before. This one's got color associated with it. This one says pencil no color, doesn't have color information associated with it. So if I put it on 2B pencil, you see how it's made of this kind of grayish kind of color. And if I put this on a red and then go to 2B pencil no color, it's the 2B pencil, but it doesn't change the color information for you. Because when you make these tool presets, you can tell it to also give you color information as well. So I'm going to tap Z for that, and then we can smooth some of this and then start blending some of the colors together. And you see, because we've already got that tone paper on there, we don't have to do too much to get something that feels like it's kind of solid. So from there, you can just add some darkening, and then you can tap X for some light, and then maybe add some highlights like that. And then maybe blur that just a little with the smudge tool. Kind of like this. There we go. So we've got that. Let's go back to the brushes. You've looked at some of these comic book ones. There's some different stuff in here. This felt marker medium tip, I do like to sketch with that one sometimes. I think that's a fun one to kind of sketch with at the very beginning stages when you're kind of laying something out. And it gives you this kind of stroke quality. It kind of feels a little bit more like a brush, at least to me, for my liking. So I think you can kind of use these to kind of almost paint with a little bit more. And then from there, I really like this pencil big strokes. It looks like I didn't realize I had color information on there with that. But this one is the main one that I use to kind of sketch shapes out with. So this is like at the very beginning, if I'm going to make some kind of creature or something like that, right? Like this is the torso, and we're going to do these big kind of shapes like this. And maybe we got something like this, and here's his pelvis and one of his legs going forward and one going kind of back, kind of like that. And then maybe we've got this guy and he's got a fist and he's holding something. If you hold on shift, you can make a straight line, so that comes in pretty handy. So this one, it feels a bit more gestural to me, and I kind of like that at the very beginning, to kind of not be so super specific about things. And then if you want, you can always take that and you can always ghost it back, and that gives you something to kind of look at, and you can make another layer. And then now if I hold on Alt and right click, we can make this brush a lot smaller and then start being a bit more specific about what it is that we're drawing. So you can kind of see some of that and through there. And this is what I was talking about, like being gestural and kind of maybe start to see some happy accidents in here, where maybe you start to see something in the shapes that just really isn't there, but your brain kind of fills in the blanks for you. And then you as the artist, you got to kind of take that and run with it a little bit. And so we got something like this. And then again, you got all the kind of techniques that I just kind of showed you for this to kind of build up your shading. You build up darkening, and then add a lightning kind of effect to it. So we can add darks and lights, and then maybe smudge those and kind of push and pull those together. So it does feel kind of like a mixture between you're going to be drawing and feeling like you're painting, and kind of bouncing back and forth, and you don't have to worry about the medium kind of messing with each other because you've got everything digital that way, right? And then if I want to put this on brush, and then we're going to do an airbrush glow that brush, and then introduce some color information with this. You can see kind of quickly we can get, we start painting with light a little bit, and we get some interesting things to start to happen on screen. And I'll just tap Z, and then, because you can always just take this stuff and push and pull it around. If it's too intense, then usually what I'll do is just start to kind of mix it away a little bit. And you can be like, you can just kind of tap on the surface for some of this. And now you can see I was using kind of like almost black. That can make things a bit muddy, so just be careful of that. Like if you introduced a little bit more color into the darker tones that I was starting to use, it might not be as kind of muddy looking as what we got going on here. But we can do something like that, and then we can, you know, start to do something a little bit lighter, put it on our brush tool, start to build up kind of rim light like this. So hopefully you can start to see that we're making something that feels like a surface, and it's a bit more solid kind of feeling. Something like that. And what I was saying is, things get too intense, I'll just put on the smudge tool, and we can even make it really small, and you don't have to be heavy-handed with it, and you can just kind of blend away just some of that intensity, and you can kind of make lines kind of disappear a little bit. I like to use that smudging tool for that particular kind of thing. And if you wanted to build this outline, again, I already showed you kind of how to do this on a different layer, so forgive me for not doing what I showed you, but I'm just kind of doing this a little bit quicker at this point. So we can do something like this and through here. And so if you want to explore some other brushes in here, there are some other brushes. There's some dirt splats and things like that. There are some more textural kind of looking kind of things to use. And I've even got some brushes in here that are like something like this star brush. You can see that if I use something like the mouse and I take the flow and put it up to 100% on here, I've even got some stuff like this in here. So you'll have to go through and see what's been made in there and see what's useful to you. But just from like straight up illustration stuff, I could stick right in through here with these. Maybe this guy, so it's maybe should move it up, but whatever. And I like this one here quite a bit. Everything else is just kind of they're there, and they're neat. Some of them are kind of fun to use or whatever, but you would have to, like I said, you'd have to kind of go through and explore and see what works for you and what you're looking for. Basically the next thing I was going to show you is just some of the illustrations that I've made using this. So I'm just going to go and say open on here, and I'm going to go to my sketch ideas, and then I'll show you just a few things. This is some new things that I've worked on. Some are a little bit older. So let me grab that, and maybe we'll grab this guy here too. Okay. So these guys are a little bit newer. So it's using the same exact techniques that I just kind of showed you for, you know, making the rough shapes, doing the line work, and using the color dodge to kind of do some of these lightning kind of effects on there and things like that. So basically with those brush sets, it might take you some time, but all these illustrations are using all the same kind of tools. And For the most part, I think they've got a somewhat consistent look. These feel a little bit more airbrush, and I think I use the airbrush tool a little bit more on these than maybe some of the other ones that I've got. But definitely, I've got to give credit to the artist. I'm a big fan of Creature Box, so I by no means have come up with this particular kind of style or whatever. I really like their work, and so just try to emulate some of that and have fun with the designs that I'm doing. I'm not doing designs for as far as trying to make a living as a concept artist. I'm just trying to have fun making illustrations and things like that. So got a lot of respect for those guys and want to make sure I'm definitely giving credit to the artists that may have started. Maybe they didn't exactly make that style, but they've definitely got their own kind of style that is very recognizable, and so I don't want anybody to think that I'm trying to rip off their work and claim that it's mine. But I really like to illustrate this way, and I thought I would just share not only the tool presets, but then show a little bit of how I work. So if you wanted to create some similar kind of designs, you could do that as well.